These are seven brothers from a small Ohio town who built the largest auto body company on Earth, employed 100,000 Americans, and helped win 2 world wars before the corporation that bought them erased their entire legacy with a restructuring memo. This is the story of Fisher Body and what happened to the towns that trusted it completely. Frederick and Charles Fisher left Norwalk, Ohio in 1904 and came to Detroit to work with their uncle Albert, a carriage builder who had already built the body of Henry Ford's first automotive contraption. What those two brothers recognized immediately was that the future had nothing to do with horses and everything to do with engines. In 1908, Albert, Frederick, and Charles formalized their work into a single company, Fisher Body, and the other 5 brothers, William, Lawrence, Edward, Alfred, and Howard, came in over time until all 7 sons of the same Ohio carriage maker were working under the same roof. A GM president once described their bond this way: "When one Fisher brother cuts himself shaving, they all bleed." 6 years after opening, Fisher Body had become the largest auto body manufacturer in the world, producing 370,000 car bodies a year for customers that included Ford, Cadillac, Studebaker, Buick, Oldsmobile, Packard, and Chevrolet. By 1916, the company owned 160,000 acres of timberland, ran more than 40 plants, and kept over 100,000 people employed. In Detroit's New Center District alone, Fisher Body occupied 3.7 million square feet of floor space, larger than even the legendary Packard plant. Then, General Motors came with an offer the brothers couldn't refuse. In 1919, GM purchased a 60% stake in Fisher Body, and the brothers stayed on to run the operation. By 1925, they sold the remaining 40%, with the total price coming to approximately $200 million, roughly $2.5 billion in today's money. The brothers took a large portion of that and put it back into Detroit, announcing a $35 million development anchored by a 26-story Art Deco tower designed by Albert Kahn. The Fisher Building still stands today, and it tells you exactly what the brothers thought they owed the city. Fully absorbed into General Motors in 1926, Fisher Body kept innovating under the GM umbrella, introducing automotive lacquer finishing, the no-draft ventilation system, slanted windshields, steel turret-top roofs, GM's first unibody car with the 1960 Corvair, and GM's first all-metric vehicle, the Chevette. All 7 brothers resigned from GM together on August 14, 1944, and the last of them, Edward, passed away in January 1972. The division they had built kept running for another 12 years after that, right up until GM decided it was done with it. When the Second World War arrived, Fisher Body's plants converted to military production without hesitation. The Cleveland plant on Coit Road put 14,000 workers on wartime output, producing tank parts, gun components, and engine nacelles for B-29 airplanes. Fisher Body Plant 21 in Detroit built parts for 5 separate aircraft, and by the time military conversion began in 1942, the company had already produced more than 21 million automobile bodies. The division earned the Navy's E Award for Excellence in Production, 21 million bodies, and then they switched to tanks. But years before the war reshaped the plants, something else had already happened inside those buildings that would define American labor history forever. The average auto worker in 1935 earned around $900 a year, and the U.S. government had calculated that a family of 4 needed at least $1,600 just to survive. GM spent $839,000 in 1934 alone spying on its own workers and using intimidation to keep unions out. Workers described being denied water breaks and bathroom trips by supervisors, and the air inside the plants made people sick. Joseph Martinez put it plainly: "You couldn't get a drink of water. You couldn't even go to the bathroom. What I mean is, you was tied down that closely." None of GM's intimidation worked. On the night of December 29, 1936, GM supervisors began secretly removing critical manufacturing dies from Fisher Body Plant 1 in Flint, planning to ship them to facilities where union presence was weak. Workers found out the same night. Plant 1 held one of only 2 complete sets of body dies GM used to stamp out nearly every 1937 car model, which meant controlling that building meant controlling GM's entire production schedule. On December 30th, the night shift locked the doors from the inside and sat down. "She's ours," one worker shouted, and he wasn't wrong. GM's output collapsed from 50,000 cars in December to just 125 in February, and over 136,000 GM workers joined the action. Police arrived at Fisher Body Plant 2 on January 11th, armed with guns and tear gas, and workers inside met them with hinges, bottles, and bolts. 14 strikers were injured by gunfire in what workers called the Battle of Running Bulls. After 44 days, the strike ended on February 11, 1937, with GM President Alfred Sloan offering a $25 million wage increase and formal recognition of the UAW. The settlement abolished piecework, established hourly pay, created overtime at time and a half, and reinstated every employee who had participated. Shirley Foster, who witnessed the end of the strike in Flint, described that night this way: "Flint would never know a feeling just like that again, because it was the first breakthrough, and it was a national, almost an international breakthrough." She turned out to be right. By the early 1980s, foreign competition and a slump in car sales had pushed GM toward cutting costs internally, and 3 Fisher Body plants in Detroit, plants 21, 40, and 41, had been labeled obsolete. In November 1982, GM announced Plant 21 would close. Plant engineer John Zammit captured the bitter irony in one sentence: "One of the most elegant cars in the world is being built in one of the most inelegant plants in the world." April 1, 1984, was the last day of production at Plant 21. Plant manager Carl Pearson came in, cleaned his office, and walked a silent factory floor. That same year, General Motors formally dissolved the Fisher Body division, 76 years after Frederick and Charles Fisher had first walked into Detroit. What followed was a chain of closures that moved city to city, and each one left the same kind of damage behind. In Cleveland, 1,343 hourly workers and 350 salaried employees lost their jobs when the Coit Road plant closed in 1983, and the city, county, and state absorbed a $4 million per year loss in tax revenue. GM's explanation was brief: more modern plants with unused capacity could handle the work. In Fairfield, Ohio, the Fisher Body plant had opened in 1946 and, at its largest, employed 5,000 people. When GM announced closure in 1986, 2,500 workers still reported there every day, and those jobs represented 28% of the entire city's income tax revenue, $1.7 million annually, gone. One Fisher Body job had supported 6 others in the surrounding economy, which meant the damage multiplied well beyond what the announcement acknowledged. City Development Director Tim Bachman put it plainly: the initial thought was whether the city was going to survive. Former employee Bob Link described the moment the news arrived with a single word: quiet. In Pontiac, UAW Local 653 President Charlie Tiedemann watched union membership fall from 15,000 to 5,000 and said, "It's terrible. It eventually affects everybody in town." In Flint, a former Fisher Body worker named Dan Wright described what the city looked like afterward. "The bars were always full, and restaurants were always full. And all these stores, bars, and restaurants you go to now, there's nobody there. And it's sad that Flint died the way it did." By 1995, whatever remained of Fisher Body had been absorbed through a series of mergers into Delphi Automotive Systems, and the Fisher name had disappeared completely. Only one plant still operated in what had once been the heart of the brothers' empire, Plant 37 in Detroit, with approximately 140 employees. 140 people, down from 100,000. 7 brothers from Ohio started a company in 1908 and built it into something that employed 100,000 people, produced 21 million car bodies before the war started, and earned Navy commendations for wartime production. Workers inside their plants fought the most consequential labor battle in American history and won, establishing rights that spread across the entire country. And then, in 1984, a restructuring memo dissolved the Fisher Body Division, not because the workers had failed, not because the products were bad. The buildings were old, the calculation went, and other plants had unused capacity. Fairfield lost 28% of its tax base. Cleveland lost $4 million a year. Pontiac's union shrank from 15,000 members to 5,000. Flint, which had once flooded its streets in celebration, watched those streets go quiet. Carl Pearson walked through a silent factory floor on April 1, 1984. Bob Link heard the closure announcement in Fairfield and described the room with one word: quiet. The Fisher brothers built something that lasted 76 years. General Motors dissolved it for efficiency and left contaminated soil in the neighborhoods where the workers' families lived. One side built something, the other walked away from it. That is the story of Fisher Body.